Welcome to the Future is Freelance podcast, bringing together the best minds from the freelance ecosystem. We honor the expertise that comes from all levels, from freelancer to platform CEO, from community builder to enterprise leader. Together, we'll define the future of work. If you value this content, there are two ways you can support it. Follow this podcast wherever you get it and leave a positive review, or share the podcast with a friend. Find out more about our movement, including live events, coaching, and tons more content at fruitioninitiatives.com. Thanks for being part of the movement. Hi, Steve.
Morning. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing well. Another beautiful day in California.
Nice. It is cloudy here outside of Denver, but that's okay because Denver is a very sunny place, and sometimes I need a little bit of cloudiness. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today. Let's get started by just giving folks a little bit more about who you are. So let's go into the three questions we start with at the top. Who are you? What is your work, and why do you do it?
Okay. I'm Steve King. I'm a partner at Emergent Research, which is a boutique research and consulting firm focused on the future of work with the emphasis around how that will impact small businesses, independent workers, gig workers, and workers in general. And we've been around for about 25 years. It's just my wife and myself are the only employees at Emergent Research. And when we founded the company, we made a decision to keep it small, to keep it just the two of us and use. And when we needed help, which we do lots of times, we hire other freelancers and other independent consultants and partner with other firms. And so at any point in time, our firm has other people working with us. But we originally designed it as a lifestyle firm and a firm where we would have flexibility, autonomy, and control. And since today's topic is about independent workers and freelancers and solopreneurs, we don't just study that, we live that life. And it gives us a bit more insight into what's going on than the average research and consulting firm looking at this topic has. So that's who I am. And that's also who our firm is. And then why do I do this work? We started out doing other types of work. We actually started out as a general corporate planning consulting firm with a tilt towards marketing, and in particular, back when we started the shift to digital marketing. And that was just based on our backgrounds. And we got asked at one point in 2005 by Intuit Corporation to help them do a series of studies on the future of small business. And that just so appealed to us. And it was so interesting that we shifted our entire business and focused on that field and niching down to even smaller groups, down to the independent freelancers ever since. And so we fell into this field, and we enjoyed it so much we've kept up.
I love it. I think something that you said really resonated with me is you don't just research this stuff, you live this. I think that I think are even more plugged into sort of this network of people and companies and platforms that are working toward the future of work. And one thing that I think really stands out for me is when I encounter, whether it's a founder or a developer or someone or a consultant or someone else who has skin in the game in a way that is different, that they actually have a background as a freelancer or solopreneur, or are actively like juggling two sides of their business, like someone like me does. Excuse me. How would you say that, like, actually being like a micro business owner to a certain extent influences the way you think about and approach the work you do as a researcher?
It's interesting. One of the biggest areas is we spend a lot of time on risk profiles and understanding how independent workers and micro business owners think about risk and manage risk. And where that matters is a lot of traditional researchers in the academic field or in the government field in particular. If you think about those people, they've chosen careers that are very safe. They're risk adverse people by nature. And I'm not being critical of that. That's just part of who they are. And a large chunk, actually, the majority chunk of the U.S. population is risk averse in terms of being interested in being an independent worker, a freelancer, or a small business owner. And so you'll see a lot of work done where everybody's, how can they do this? And you see a lot of negative work around being an independent worker or a freelancer. And as people who have made the plunge, who understand what the risks and returns are and the advantages and benefits and the disadvantages, we've always felt, gosh, we have a much better understanding at the psychological level of what these people are what independent workers are dealing with, why they're dealing with it, and what they're looking for. And the short version is freedom, flexibility, and control is what they're looking for. And in exchange, they're giving up predictable income, in some cases benefits, in some cases less security. Although the way the world has changed, traditional employment, that's becoming less true every day. So we've always looked at it as a teeter totter where you're making a choice. And historically, the teeter totter kind of tilted towards traditional employment. And that's where a lot of the researchers come from. And so they say, it's bad. And we've always been on the other side of the teeter totter saying, no, it's good and bad. It depends on the specifics. So that was a long answer to that. But I think the other piece for us is because we go through the daily challenges of what it means to be a freelancer. We just have a better sense of how to ask about it, how to study it, how to research it, how to get insights about it. And when we when we do interviews, when we do focus groups, when we meet with freelancers and solopreneurs, when we survey them, we just have a natural, deeper understanding of the average researcher because, oh yeah, we did that yesterday.
Yeah, I think it's so important. Like the work I do as a consultant, as I mentioned to you before we hit record, is mainly with researchers. And I think although my researchers that I work for operate in a slightly different content area, I think one of the most powerful things I see with the most impactful research is has a connection between research and in my field, which is education, what we call practice. So instead of having researchers just research for the sake of researching and publishing and putting information out into the world, it's really having this intersection of research and practice where practitioners are informing what the research is asking and researchers are actually
Hmm.
informing how practitioners practice. And as you're saying that, I think it's not only that you think about and I would and craft your research in a different way because of your on the ground experience being a solopreneur, but also probably have a different level of insight into what that research actually means. I think so often it's just there's so much information constantly coming at us, and especially on a research front, it's like we get all this information and we're like, okay, but what do we do about it? What does it mean? What do we
Right.
do about it from a and I you touch like all different parts of this of the freelance and future work ecosystem from platforms and marketplaces all the way down to individual freelancers. But I'm curious your thoughts on what does and that's a big question. So maybe pick the level at which is helpful to answer this question. But how do you think about the like helping people and companies and organizations utilize the research to actually do something with it?
I think you try to, we work with both what I would call the buy side and the sell side of this world and the intermediary. So some of our clients are corporations that employ freelancers and solopreneurs. Some of them are platforms that connect them one another, people in the like Fiverr and Upwork in that part of the world. And then of course we work directly with freelancers themselves. And I think that one of the biggest issues right now is that value chain is very difficult to navigate for both sides. Corporations have a hard time figuring out who to hire, how to manage freelancers on average. And at the other side, freelancers have a hard time getting additional work. And everybody's research, ours certainly, and everybody else's, if you ask what's the biggest issue facing most freelancers, and when I say freelancers here, I really mean people that provide services of some sort, as opposed to the product world, which is very big too. But even the product world has the same issue, which is how do I find more business? How do I get more clients? How do I get more customers? Always the single biggest issue that we hear when we ask, what are your biggest business issues? So that's broken or never really built properly. And then we have now the online intermediaries coming in the talent marketplaces, and they're helping. But if I had to look at one thing, I would say we have to get better at that value chain proposition and helping people navigate it from both directions. And if you're a big corporation and you're buying pencils, they've got that nailed. They do that easily. They know exactly how to do it. If you're decided, oh, I need a new data scientist to help me with some project, then it's just very complicated and nobody's really nailed it. And then once I've hired that data scientist, how do I treat them? How do I manage them? How do I work with them? How do I integrate them into my teams? Those are all issues that are still unsolved problems, is a nice way of saying it. And so, from our perspective, we have two objectives in our work. One is we want to make freelancing itself safer and more secure because more people would then do it. I mentioned earlier about the risk profiles. A lot of people won't consider it because they're like, oh my goodness, that's not safe. That's not secure. I'll lose my house. We need to make it safer and secure, both for existing freelancers and to allow other people to come in. And then on the hiring side, we need to learn how to hire people, how to blend them into our teams, and how to manage them in a way that we maximize the productivity that they can provide. And given the way I'm giving you a long answer because you asked me a long question. Given the
Right.
way the corporate world has worked, every corporation in America's and in the world is looking to be more agile and more flexible. And reduce fixed costs. What's most corporations, one of their biggest fixed costs? Employees. No one likes it when I say employees are fixed costs. No, they're people, but they're also fixed costs. And so corporations are going to have moved and will continue to be moving to more freelancers to gain that agility, and flexibility that they provide. So there's a ton of stuff to be done still. And so I feel like we've been at it for 15, 16 years specifically in this space. And we can hardly declare victory.
It's yeah, it is you're naming the challenge that I'm recognizing in the places of this ecosystem that I touch as well. And I think that there's something about and this is why I think the research that I've seen, tons of research that I think you've done with various partners that I am always thinking about is it is really it is like when we say future of work, it really is redefining work from both
Hmm.
sides. Like you said, making it feel more safe and secure from the freelancer side so more people feel empowered to do it. But I also think you're really hitting something on the head there where it's a traditional quote unquote management structure is not how you operate with a freelancer. So ideally, you're getting ideally part of the really amazing power of a top tier freelancer is you're hiring a top tier expert who knows how to come in and do exactly what you want them to do. They don't need their handheld. They may need a little bit of onboarding and context, but that's the beauty of the top tier freelancer. And I
Hmm.
think those people end up are definitely, like you said in the beginning, flexibility, freedom, autonomy, and control. If being quote unquote managed by someone can be very off-putting for someone who's, yeah, that's not why I signed up for this. That's not how I
Right.
operate.
Right.
So you really have to you're like completely redefining and creating a different paradigm of work between those two parties that I think it can be a really huge mindset shift, especially from a corporate level where it's like, what does that actually look like? You said blending them into a team and quote unquote like managing that type of workforce.
Yeah, and that's because and it's becoming more complex for corporates to manage teams anyway, because we have hybrid work now where we used to all be in the office. We have AI coming in and we have more and more freelancers joining. And we have a whole task, everything's being turned into tasks and teams instead of traditional hierarchical structures. So there's a lot going on anyway, in addition to the freelancers coming in. So that management challenge is very large. And when you talk to corporations, they all recognize it. They just don't know what to do.
Yeah. Um, okay, I want to switch gears a little bit because I know that something new part of I think all every this is the buzzword everywhere, but something that you've been looking at pretty closely over the last or recently is AI. And so I'm
Hmm.
curious if you can tell us, especially the intersection between AI and the future of work, which is like pretty broad, but I think freelancers obviously are like thinking about and worrying about or leveraging AI in different ways. I think companies are also probably leveraging that not just in their companies, but with their talent management strategies and talent. Give us the headlines.
So the near term headline is it generative AI systems, which is what most people now think of as AI. AI is actually a much broader term, but generative, which is Chat GPT and Microsoft Copilot, Anthropic's Claude, those types of systems where they're chatbots more or less. You type in a prompt, which is usually a question, and it suddenly starts spitting out information at you. We've been The adoption rate of that technology is by far the fastest of any tech app ever, by far. And my career goes back long enough that I started as a consultant. One of my first projects for a major consulting firm was to figure out how quickly people would adopt this newfangled thing called the personal computer. And so I go way back on technology diffusion. And when you look across, nothing even comes close. And the main reason is it leverages existing technology. We all have access to it, just need a browser. So it's moving as a user base, it's moving very fast. And the same thing's true within the freelance community. Um, we did a study that's now out of date. We had about a third of freelancers telling us that they were active using it. Now, we're about to field another study on that, and I'm sure it'll go up to 55%. And you have to be very careful when you're asking about stuff like this because there's a lot of false positives. We have a lot to get into the technical nitty gritty. We have a lot of ways of finding, but clearly this is just an explosive technology. And what we've learned already in our work, and we use it a lot in our work, and we've studied a lot of freelancers using it, most of them are seeing 20 to 25% improvements in productivity. And so the productivity is there. The tasks are things like certainly writings, writing's a big one, general admin stuff, research broadly defined. If I want to, like, how big is the market for shampoo? They'll give you an answer. It may or may not be right, but they will very quickly give you an answer. So there's a whole slew of applications. There's just so much going on that it's hard to even track. And what's clear from it is there's a Harvard professor, Cowie, who said you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to some other human using AI. And that's the right quote. We firmly believe you either are going to be good at AI or you're going to find something else to do because it is a useful productivity tool. So in the short run, our recommendation freelancers is start experimenting with it, start to figure out where you can use it, start integrating it into your workflows where you can, and just see where it works for you. And I know that's a broad set of guidelines, but it really is unique to each individual and what they do. Longer term, will it displace jobs? Absolutely. New technologies and automation always cause a lot of it. We call it economic dislocation in the economist world. That means bad news for people with jobs. But at the same time, it'll create new jobs. And so we're net positive on the long-term effects on employment and opportunities for freelancers. But unfortunately, there will be a lot of problems along the way. And with any new technology that's happened in the past and any new form of automation, it's actually benefited freelancers because it's democratized tools. So we started my own business 25 years ago when we realized I don't need to work for a big company that has giant computers. The software had reached the point where I could do stuff at home, statistical analysis, modeling, financial projections that simply weren't possible for a small business to do prior to that. And that same democratization, when you look across with the internet over and over again, and this is another example, I now have tools that make it easier for me and easy for me to compete with the biggest companies in the world. I still consider after we got the statistical software and some of the other financial planning software, one of the highlights of my career was when we walked in and a client said to us, gee, we're really glad we hired you for this project instead of that other company. I didn't even realize we were competing at the time. And I said, who was the other company? He said, McKinsey. And so we'd reached the point where a husband and wife sitting in their spare bedroom at home beat McKinsey on a big project. So and this is just a continuation of that. So we're very excited about long term. Let me stop rambling there.
No, that's great. I love that s spin makes it sound dishonest, but I love that spin on it is that every time technology, like you said, it always is going like, the pace of technology is always going to displace jobs. Jobs are constantly gonna change, like, that just is the reality of the way our economic system and technology works, and the parallel that I was drawing in my mind as you were saying that is that's another like the democratization of work, I think is really interesting spin on it because that is also like how I think about freelancers is that like freelancers and especially this like rise or maybe just higher level of visibility of like maybe like fractional type of C-suite freelancers is freelancers give small businesses the opportunity to have a top tier expert that they wouldn't be able to hire full time. And
Yeah.
so you can hire a freelancer you can hire a fractional COO or even like an amazing graphic designer, whatever it is, a piece of a top tier expert that can help your business transform in a way that you wouldn't have been able to do if you had to hire that person full time. And so it's really interesting as you're talking about AI and technology in general being able to help propel individual solo businesses or small businesses or micro businesses forward and be able to compete in a space where previously only huge corporate like I love the McKinsey example because that type of competition wouldn't have been possible before. And
No.
so that I love it is such like a positive I think a lot of freelancers feel, as I'm sure lots of employees in all their sectors feel very afraid of AI. And I love that sort of frame on it that this can be a tool to help us compete in an arena where we wouldn't be able to compete before.
Yeah, and it's going to open up new opportunities for almost any freelancer who has a field of expertise to expand their business, try new business models, and try new approaches. So there's also some real upside there. I think you can get more leverage out of it. As I said, in our own work, we're seeing what we hear from our freelancers, which is we're seeing roughly 20% productivity improvement, which we're not passing on to our clients at all. So hopefully, my clients aren't listening right now, but which means our margins have gone up substantially thanks to AI. So the opportunities are there, but as I've mentioned, risks and threats. Other people with AI, there will be a whole bunch, and it's happening in the creative world very quickly. The canary in the coal mine are creative professionals in general, and creative freelancers in particular, who are doing low end creative work. And that by low end, I simply mean something that's easily automatable. I'm not being pejorative about the type of work. It's just that some of this stuff's easy to automate. And if you're doing that right now, you are definitely at risk of being replaced. And that's the classic freelancer dilemma. And one of the issues we all face in this, we're like sharks. If we quit swimming, we drown. So you gotta upscale, you gotta train, you gotta figure out how to use it, you gotta figure out how to more value add. Maybe you have to hire a business coach to help do that.
Maybe. It's interesting because yeah, I do feel like it forces us to up our game, which we should
Yeah.
constantly as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, hopefully we're consistently doing that anyways. But I was thinking about the platform that I use to run my coaching program and like courses and things like that has like an AI plugin that's tell us the course you want to build and we will build it for you. Or we're like build a template for you. And I'm like, if an A if generative AI can build that course, then I shouldn't be building, right?
Mhm.
That means that people can just go out that's advice that anyone can go out and Google and find. That's not actually the things that are gonna move the needle for anyone. And that is it I love that idea of it, like, forcing us to really get smarter and more not only smarter and more strategic about what we're doing, but raise that value proposition for our clients where it's, "Hey, AI can help you do X, Y, and Z," but there are still complex problems to be solved in our businesses, and that's the work that only strategic thinker can be able to do. And so if you find AI coming for your job, that might mean that you need to think on the next two levels up about what you're doing and what does it look like to do that at a level that AI isn't doing it.
Yeah, and the example back in 2012, 2013, Oxford University put out a study saying that accountants and bookkeepers would be out of work by 2024. It's 2024 now, and we have more accountants and bookkeepers, and there are actually a shortage of them, so that forecast didn't exactly pan out. But it did get the industry focused on what that meant. And we've been following that industry since then as a way to look at how automation was affecting knowledge work. And what happened was automation freed people up to add more value. And so if you look at the average bookkeeper now, what they do and what they did 20 years ago, or the average accountant, very different job. It's much more advisory and it's much less clerical. And along the way, unfortunately, a lot of people lost their jobs, but along the way, a lot of people got better jobs and improved their jobs and made more money and had more interesting work. And so again, winners and losers is unfortunately part of this game. And we don't yet in the near term see a reason why this would be any different. And we've been doing forecasting for a long time. The four words that are most wrong in forecasting is this time is different. And so as we don't see any reason why in the near term this time is different. Now, AI is different in terms of the pace at which it's advancing and the ultimate goal, which is to build systems that are smarter than humans in all aspects. So we've never actually had either of those things happen. The speed at which this industry is moving is frightening in a lot of ways. And so we have the opportunity, mainly because some of our clients are some of the top AI companies in the world, to see what's going on under the hood. And it's scary. The next 2 or 3 years, not so scary.
Yeah.
Next 5 years, 10 years, very scary. So when I talk about all of this, I talk 2 to 3 years because after that, we just don't have the ability to know exactly where this is going. But we have to get through the next 2 to 3 years to worry about the 5 years anyway.
Yeah.
So we have to stick with what we can see.
That's right. I'm a big believer in short cycle planning. That is my main that's my main structure for goal setting for myself is we don't actually know what the future is gonna look like. So let's just like plan for the next right thing and then we'll tackle that bridge when we get there. I'd love for you to switching gears one more time and maybe we can use this as our last big question is what is and maybe it's AI related, maybe it's not, but you again touch this ecosystem in so many different ways with your research. I'm curious of the most interesting thing that you've learned recently. Like of all the findings that you've seen come out, I don't know, over the last few months since the beginning of the year, whatever time frame you want to use. What is like the most interesting thing that you've seen?
The most interesting thing over the last few years, so let me start with the last
Great.
few years, is if you go back to, say, 2010 and look at what drove the drivers of the rise of freelancing between 2010 and 2020. It was driven mostly by people doing it part-time and as side gigs. And so when I'm using the word freelancing here, I'm using independent workers. So it's a lot broader than people providing corporate services. It includes dog walkers and Uber drivers and lots of different forms of part-time work that's even occasional work that was either to pursue a passion or more likely to supplement income. And so if you look at the share of full-time freelancers, people who did this work full-time, it was growing faster than the labor force overall, but relatively slow in an absolute sense. So the labor force grows about 1% a year during that period. Full-timers were growing at about 1.5 to 2%. So not very fast. Since the pandemic, the number of people who are doing this full time has actually grown faster than the number of people doing it part time for the first time ever. And it's growing very rapidly by any standard. And so what we've seen since the pandemic is this shift away from being traditionally employed. If you asked me in 2019, and it's still true today, in 2019, someone would say, "Well, everybody's going to be a freelancer." And I said, "Do you mean full time or part time?" If you ask me, is everybody going to be a freelancer for their primary source of income in the next 20 years? I'd say no. traditional jobs will still be the way most households get. It's the primary source of income for most households in America. I still believe that to be true. But what has shifted is we're seeing full time work, making the full plunge, become much more popular, and more people are doing it. And that's a really fundamental shift. But we've been talking about this. If you go back to the history of freelancing, the Megatrends book in the 1980s had it. Freelance Nation, Daniel Pink's book was written in 2000. But and so we've been saying, and like many trends, long-term trends, they take a long time to happen. So it's finally happened. So that's the most interesting thing is people are actually doing this full time at a much greater rate than they were in the past. In terms of the more recent stuff, is the recognition that this is happening is really shifting. And this is going to sound a little archaic or arcane, but in the last 6 months, a whole bunch of people that have claimed that the trend towards freelancing isn't happening have changed their minds. And in particular, I'm not going to name names because some of them we interact with a lot of different people that told us sometimes not even nicely from the 2016 to 2020 period that we were wrong, nuts, stupid, whatever, are now saying, gee, this thing's really happening. And that attitudinal shift is something that we've been waiting for, working to try to make happen for 15 years now. And so in the last few months in particular, there have been a couple of Harvard Business Review articles by people that used to not believe in the trend that have jumped on board. There's been other thought leaders in academia in other fields that used to be resistant to the idea that it was even happening. There's been a slew of papers about why the BLS data doesn't capture this segment very well, a number of which are written by people that have papers, if you go back 5 or 6 years, saying that, of course, it captures it. And so there's been a real fundamental shift in attitudes towards this segment and now that it's viable, that it's big, it's growing. And to me, that's the most important near term shift we've seen. And of course, more corporations are accepting it too. Yeah. So it's just been, and I think the pandemic had something to do with that. The great resignation, all of the stuff about that, work to live, not work to live to work. That whole thing certainly had a part of it. But, but for the first time since we've been studying it, it's accepted across by pretty much everybody. This is big. This is growing. This is the future.
I love it. That finding makes my heart very happy. I think it also connects back to what you said about the value chain and thinking about the buy and the sell side together is those pieces have to all come together in order for the growing of the full-time freelancer is obviously connected to demand for freelance talent, which especially I think a high level corporate or enterprise level is connected to, like you said, recognizing that it is trending in this direction. Almost like AI. Get on board or or get
Yeah.
left behind.
Yeah. And if you count the occasionals and the part timers, we really have reached the point where about 40% of working Americans have some form of independent work, gig work, whatever it is, freelancing. And that's a huge jump from a decade ago. And yeah, I think getting on board or at least being prepared. One of the questions we asked in our annual studies is, have you ever been an independent worker or small business owner or freelancer? And during your career, and we're up to about 44 or 45% of Americans saying yes to that. And those are the people who aren't current freelancers. And so when you adjust through all the data and everything, you find out we're getting close to where 2/3 of Americans at some point in their careers are saying, I've been an independent worker. I've been a non-traditional worker. And so one of the people asked me, what's the advice I'm going to give someone who's like in college or high school thinking about this is, and what one set of advice I have is the stats say pretty clearly that at some point in your life, you're going to be an independent worker, maybe part-time, maybe not, maybe full-time. You ought to at least start to think about what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Because the majority of America, if you're 21 years old today, that number is going to probably go to 70% fairly soon. It's just something that everybody needs to think about how do you integrate that into your career goals, objectives, and life, because the odds are you're going to do it at least part time at some point.
I think that is the perfect piece of advice to leave us on. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us. There are clearly, I have 5 pages of things that I've been writing down. There are clearly many other avenues we could go down. So hopefully we'll be able to have you back on again in the future. But tell us more about like where we can find out more about your research. I know you run huge studies for some of the biggest players in this field, but like where should we find out more about you or find out more about what your research is showing?
Yeah, at this point, LinkedIn's where we post a lot of stuff. So Steve King, Emergent Research, I'll pop up. We have a blog called Small Business Labs that we've drifted away from some lately, just because, well, we're cool. But it's still a useful source, and smallbizlabs.com, small biz labs, any of that will pull it up. Our annual study that we're on year 14 of is with our client MBO partners. And if you just search on MBO partners and then state of independence or MBO partners SOI, all of those reports and related reports, in addition to the annual census study, which provides the numbers of independent workers, attitudes and motivations. We've done a series of other studies with them over the years, more recently on the creator economy, a series on digital nomadism, a series on what we call client of choice, how a corporation can become a preferred hire of freelancers, companies, making your company such that if I'm a skilled freelancer, I want to work for you, things like that. So there's a whole bunch of stuff if you just do MBO partners, state of independence. Those are the best places. And then, yeah, LinkedIn.
Perfect. We'll definitely put some of those links in the show notes in addition to the link to your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, and I'm also on Twitter if you want to yell at, swear at me, or complain about what I do. That's what Twitter's for these days, near as I can tell. So
Yep, that is what
do it
Twitter's
there.
for. Yep, we will definitely put a link to that too. Thanks so much again, Steve. I really appreciate you having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you value this content, please follow this podcast wherever you get it and leave us a positive review. You can also share the podcast with a friend. Find out more about everything that we do, including live events, coaching, and a lot more content at fruitioninitiatives.com.